The city of Ipswich is often relegated into the shadows of the capital, Brisbane. But it's important to realise that Ipswich has its own rich, unique and complex history that's worth investigating. In this documentary, we're going to be taking a look at a critical turning point in the development of Ipswich, the construction of Queensland's first railway.
This stands out as more than simply an achievement of industrial engineering. It was the driving force for profound economic and political change in Ipswich. The railway transformed the transportation of goods and people across the Queensland colony, sparked a political rivalry with Brisbane, and ultimately took Ipswich from a small town with an economy based on river trade to a manufacturing and industrial stronghold.
Long before the construction of the first railway in Queensland, Ipswich was serving an important role as a key transshipment point. This is because of the Bremer and Brisbane rivers, which allowed Brisbane and Ipswich to serve as the outlets for the produce of the Darling Downs.
Produce, such as wool, tallow and hides from the Darling Downs, arrived by bollock drays, filling the streets such as Bell, East and Bremer with activity. The goods would then be loaded onto river streamers or flat-bottom punts, travelling down the Bremer and Brisbane rivers to Brisbane for export. Conversely, the supplies bound for inland regions would follow this same route in reverse. Despite technically being a tributary, the river served practically as a highway.
This period between the 1850s and early 1870s was the height of the river trade, and Ipswich's position as the head of navigation and the commercial gateway to the Darling Downs was firmly cemented. And this actually provided Ipswich with considerable leverage, strengthening its political influence and, in a sense, increasing its competition with Brisbane for the status of capital.
However, there were also unavoidable limitations of the river which became increasingly problematic. The winding 50-mile journey was lengthy in comparison to the 24-mile road distance to Brisbane. Additionally, as noted in an 1861 report by Lieutenant George Heath, the movement of steamers was impeded by numerous rocks and boulders, those which required constant, though often incomplete, clearing and dredging efforts. The shallow sandbar at the entrance of the Brisbane River also obstructed larger ships from reaching Ipswich, resulting in expensive and time-costly transshipment in Moreton Bay. Additionally, poorly maintained roads often made overland travel to the Darling Downs challenging.
The expanding parcel industry highlighted the increasing inefficiencies with the current transport system, and as a consequence in the early 1860s, proposals were being made for the first railway in Queensland. Obviously, it was viewed as a far more efficient means of transport throughout the colony, and Ipswich, already being a centre for the current transport system, was keen to place itself front and centre in this new development. The decision to commence construction of Queensland's first railway in Ipswich was a critical juncture. As we've seen, Ipswich served as the key gateway to the west, and there needed to be a reliable link from the Darling Downs to Ipswich, particularly given the difficulties that we've seen with overland and, to a certain extent, river-based travel.
The first Premier of Queensland, Robert Herbert, had travelled to London in 1862 and 1863 and discovered that the government could take out incredibly large loans from the London market to fund the railway project. Upon his return to Queensland, he advocated strongly for a government-controlled railway, removed from the hands of private enterprise. In May of 1863, the first bill for the establishment of the railway was introduced into the Queensland Parliament, and it passed with a small majority in the Legislative Assembly before also being passed through the now abolished Legislative Council in September of the same year. In December, engineer Abram Fitzgibbon was appointed as the first Commissioner for Queensland Railways, immediately calling for tenders on the first section of the railway, which was to be 33.8 kilometres, stretching from Ipswich to Little Liverpool Range. The contract was won in early 1864 by civil engineering company Pato, Brassey and Betts for the value of £86,900. The turning of the first sod on February 26, 1864, at North Ipswich, marked the beginning of construction just over a month after the contract was awarded. Immediately, the project drew in a large workforce to the Ipswich region due to ample employment opportunities and good pay. Workers would be paid an impressive 35 shillings a week, working typically 6 days and having the Sabbath to rest. Queensland's first 4 locomotives were shipped over from the UK in late 1864, going by the names of Premier, Lady Bowen, Whakabala and Pioneer. The first section of the railway from Ipswich to Grantchester was opened on the 31st of July 1865, which was declared a public holiday. The 4 aforementioned locomotives each ran along this route that day, with 500 people invited to attend what was a monumental day for Ipswich's community.
And from this point, there was undoubtedly a focus on the westward expansion of the railway, hoping to further solidify Ipswich's position as the head of navigation. As a result, the line was extended out to Dalby and Toowoomba, and £1.5 million was actually spent on this westward and southward expansion of the railway throughout the 1870s.
Interestingly, this westward expansion tied in with an intense rivalry between Ipswich and Brisbane, and it goes to show how the development of the railways impacted upon Ipswich politically. This rivalry was reflected in an edition of the North Australian in 1866, which emphasised the importance of Ipswich and claimed, even should it be resolved that the headquarters of the future governor shall be situated at the port of Brisbane, Ipswich must always be the commercial capital. In the colonial parliament, Ipswich representatives lobbied aggressively for the railway to continue its expansion westward and simultaneously stood in strong opposition to its extension to Brisbane.
And there are undoubtedly concerns that linking the railway to Brisbane would cause 2 things to happen. Firstly, Ipswich's importance as a trading and transportation hub would be diminished. And secondly, the river trade, which was still very prosperous for Ipswich at the time, would be nullified.
The position taken by the 6 Legislative Assembly members representing Ipswich and the West Moreton regions, often referred to as the Ipswich Bunch, was that the Bremer River remained sufficient for connecting Ipswich to Brisbane. Instead, priority should be given to connecting Ipswich to the interior to facilitate trade.
And this political battle continued throughout the 1870s, with arguments persisting about the river's navigability and suitability for connecting Ipswich to the port. It was thought by many that opposed to the Brisbane connection that the railway was inherently Ipswichian.
Many petitions demanding the extension of the railway were submitted to the government, with one petition noting that no system of railway can prove successful that does not connect the metropolis, the principal shipping port, with the interior of the colony.
And despite the best efforts of the Ipswich Bunch, the railway connection to Brisbane was completed in 1875, and it's an important moment. Certainly some of the concerns of the Ipswich politicians rang true, with this continuous line from Darling Downs through Ipswich and to Brisbane meaning a significant reduction in the river trade.
It is certainly true that the era dominated by the river trade and paddle steamers had now faded away. The large crane at the Ipswich wharves was removed in 1878, and the extent of river traffic was limited to the small-scale transportation of coal and occasional cargo vessels. The Bremer River was no longer the commercial highway that once served as the driver of Ipswich's economy.
However, as the old saying goes, where one door closes, another opens, and this certainly rang true for Ipswich here. With a direct line now from Ipswich to Brisbane, this opened new supply chains and markets. And there's one industry in particular that benefited from this, and it would revolutionise the industrialisation of Ipswich, that being coal mining.
In the Ipswich region, places like Loamside, Rosewood and Walloon had massive coal reserves. Previously, the Bremer River was the main transport route for coal. However, the railway clearly offered a more efficient means of moving coal from the mines to markets and the Brisbane Wharf for export. The railway extension facilitated the expansion of the coal mines by connecting them to the main line via branch lines. The increase in production for the Ipswich mines was substantial. In 1860, the local Ipswich mines were producing 12,327 tonnes of coal. Comparatively, by 1876, this figure had almost quadrupled to over 40,000 tonnes and 700 tonnes of coke.
During the late 19th century, Ipswich and its surrounding areas were responsible for over half of Queensland's coal output, clearly indicating its ascension to an industrial powerhouse within the colony.
It should also be noted that the railway was not simply a transporter, but also a major consumer of Ipswich's coal. Given the switch from burning wood to burning coal in Queensland locomotives after 1870, in particular on the southern and northern lines, there was a continuous demand for the local coal product.
Ipswich's economy was truly interconnected with the railways, and throughout the late 19th century we really begin to see just how much of an industrial powerhouse the city was becoming.
Just look at this newspaper article in the Brisbane Courier from October the 24th, 1877. The natural productions of the surrounding country, the abundance of coal, excellent timber, water, iron and other metals, all aid in making Ipswich a most suitable place, not for the railway workshops only, but for the various manufacturing industries that are steadily concentrating in and near the town.
And this brings us to discuss another key pillar of late 19th century Ipswich's economy that was established with the construction and continued expansion of the Queensland railways. That was the North Ipswich Railway Workshops.
The workshops were first established in 1864 and grew rapidly given the extensive railway constructions occurring throughout the colony. It was a symbiotic relationship in which the railway's expansion demanded continuous maintenance and repairs, with the workshops providing the support while simultaneously expanding its operations. Ipswich was chosen as the location for the workshops due to a combination of its aforementioned strong political influence and its status as a starting point of the railway. There was a large influx of skilled workers and engineers to the workshops, boosting Ipswich's economy and solidifying its identity as a centre of the manufacturing industry. By 1879, the workshop provided employment to hundreds of workers, with the locomotive works alone accounting for 382 of these. The size of the operations of the workshops continued to increase throughout the late 19th century, and this is reflected in George Harrison's 1910 Jubilee History of Ipswich. It is certainly an interesting source, as Harrison is, in writing a secondary source on Ipswich's history, simultaneously providing us with an insight into the workshops during one of their busiest periods of operation. Harrison notes that Ipswich was the headquarters of the industrial portion of the railways, and that the workshops covered 10.5 acres of ground and admittedly are as up to date in their general equipment as any in the southern hemisphere.
And the railway workshops, in combination with the coal mining industry, provided Ipswich with a more dependable and long-lasting economic base, particularly in comparison to the variability that's inherent in having an economy built on river trade.
Overall, Ipswich's development both economically and politically was closely tied with the construction and expansion of Queensland's first railway. Undoubtedly, the region was prosperous during the decades dominated by river trading, in which Ipswich was the key transshipment hub and a gateway to Queensland's interior. However, the inefficiencies of river transport along the Bremer meant that, as the colony expanded, there needed to be a more efficient means for moving goods from the interior to the ports. The establishment of the first railway in Ipswich was a key turning point for trade and commerce in Queensland. Whilst the need for the river trade in Ipswich was largely nullified, new opportunities were presented through the transportation of coal and the rapid growth of the North Ipswich Railway Workshops.
So we can see that the establishment of the first railway in Ipswich transformed the colony's economy, sparked a political rivalry with Brisbane, and took Ipswich from a riverine trading hub on the banks of the Bremer River to one of the key industrial centres of the late 19th and early 20th century Queensland.